this breakout session 7 at the European Experience of Combating Anti-Semitism, Racism, and Xenophobia. We have 6 distinguished panelists, and my co-moderator, Valerie Engel, and I have known each other for many, many years and have worked together on too many issues to remember. My name is Mark Levin. I'm the CEO of the National Coalition Supporting Eurasian Jewry. My organization was created several decades ago to help get Soviet Jews out of the Soviet Union. We have transitioned since the implosion or the breakup of the USSR to focusing on Jewish communities in Eastern Europe and throughout what we used to call the former Soviet Union. I stand before you at a time of great tragedy and grief in my own community, given the events in Pittsburgh on Saturday. I am actually quite interested in hearing from our panelists about what's happening in their own countries and in the region. We have, I think we have an opportunity to learn, but what Valerie and I would like to do, and we're asking the panelists if they can speak for about 10 minutes or so, because what we'd like to do, and it might be unique for much of this conference, is that after everybody makes their presentations, we want to try to make this as interactive as possible among the panelists as well as with the audience, with the participants in the audience. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague Valerie, and we will get started. And again, welcome.
Уважаемые коллеги, я буду говорить по-русски для баланса. И хотел поблагодарить Марка. Мы действительно много лет знакомы в еврейском движении. И когда еще существовал Советский Союз, организация Марка Левина, National Conference, это была синонимом той силы, которую мы называли Международное еврейство, которая действительно стояла на защите прав советского тогда, а сегодня русскоязычного еврейства. И, в общем, надо отдать должное Марку, что эта организация существует по сей день и выполняет примерно те же функции и в каком-то новом варианте. И является одной из тех структур, которые действительно, реально, очень много и очень серьезно помогают евреям на территории бывшего Советского Союза. Тема нашего... Да, ну а себя я, так сказать, в программе написано, я являюсь руководителем Центра мониторинга и компаративного анализа межкультурных коммуникаций, а также старшим научным сотрудником Центра по анализу права радикализма в Лондоне. А Центр межкультурных коммуникаций, он создан при Московском институте психоанализа здесь, в Москве. Довольно интересное начинание. И я являюсь руководителем группы, которая на протяжении уже 3 лет делает сегодня обзор, доклад по ксенофобии и радикализму в Европе. Тема нашего сегодняшнего заседания – Европейский опыт противодействия антисемитизму, расизму и ксенофобии. Я сейчас вот встречался с Михаилом Александровичем Федотовым, руководителем Совета по правам человека при президенте, и он сказал замечательную вещь о том, что в правах человека не бывает учителей и учеников, мы все ученики, и все друг у друга чему-то учимся. Поэтому вот европейский опыт, наверное, является очень важным для нас, особенно в том, что касается противодействия антисемитизму, расизму и ксенофобии. Я хотел бы предоставить слово госпоже Вере Тика, Франвера Тика, докторант политологии университета Пантеон, Греция, проявление антисемитизма в Греции, его смысловое значение. Мы только что с Верой закончили очень серьезную конференцию в Афинах, посвященную ксенофобии и радикализму, глобальным вызовам в Европе. и вот сразу приехали сюда. И я думаю, что греческий опыт действительно это опыт серьезный, о котором стоит послушать. Спасибо. Госпожа Тика.
Thank you, dear colleagues, dear friends. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's very nice to be here in this forum. In recent years, there has been a considerable focus on anti-Semitism in Europe, but also for Greece, because of its because the prominence and prevalence of anti-Semitism, both as a rhetoric and as a manifestation of concrete action of hatred. In the basis of this distinction, I will attempt a description of anti-Semitism in today Greece. Anti-Semitism is typically described as a sentiment, a theorization, or a behavior of hostility to prejudice or discrimination against Jews. In this general context, anti-Semitism has been broadly defined according to the working definition on anti-Semitism of the European Agency of Fundamental Rights as a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. In parallel, as history shows, anti-Semitism is not merely an attitude, but also an activity. Thus, the anti-Semitism is not only a sentiment, but also rhetoric and physical manifestations that are directed against Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or against their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. In the same category can be included also the manifestations, the targeting of the State of Israel, conceived as a Jewish collectivity, and in the grounds of conspiracy theories as culprits for any wrong in the society, mainly in the field of economy. In this vein, most attempts to conceptualize historically anti-Semitism emphasize the semantics of the term itself, involving two Greek words, anti, that means anti, and Semit, meaning against the Jews, or in other words, hostility against the Jewish. But as the manifestations of hatred through long periods of time have not been of the same type, we can distinguish different forms of anti-Semitism. Thus, we can talk about Egyptian national religious anti-Judaism, Roman Hellenistic Judaism, of Christian religious Judaism, of Islamic political religious Judaism, and starting from the 19th century, in the ground of the progressive emancipation of the Jews in Europe, of harmful ideologies and actions toward Jews. In the second category, this hatred is described as anti-Semitism or racist anti-Semitism, denoting a system of ideas and manifestations against Jews as members of Jewish or Semite race. In this line, anti-Semitism can be considered as a component of the nativism expressed from radical right-wing populism and extremism. In other words, as scholar Kashmut defines, nativism is an ideology which holds that states should be inhabited exclusively by members of the native group, that means the nation, and that non-native elements, persons, and ideas are fundamentally threatening to the homogeneous nation state. Thus, a major attention on studying anti-Semitism is to concentrate on the manifestations, rhetoric or physical, of the right-wing part of the political spectrum, or to that part that is developed in the shadow of the politics and is described as extremism. Despite the fact that the Jewish community numbers approximately 5,000, most of them living in Athens and in Thessaloniki, anti-Semitism is a well-embedded and widespread phenomenon, manifesting itself in religious, educational, judicial, media, and party political contexts. In a general level, anti-Semitism is reflected mainly in the perceptions of the Greek citizens, as latent prejudices. Though single acts of violence and verbal aggressiveness were not absent from the Greek territory and during the years of the economic crisis. Anti-Semitism attracted the attention of pundits after 2012 with the rise of neo-Nazi Party of Golden Dawn, a party with an explicit anti-Semitic discourse, and after the publication of a study from ADL. According to this study, ADL Global 100, Greece was the most anti-Semitic country throughout Europe, scoring 69%, with the strongest anti-Semitic attitudes in the world. In the context of Western Europe, the second most anti-Semitic country after Greece was France, with a score of 37%. Outside Europe, anti-Semitism score of Greece is similar as that of Turkey, with 69%. The extent to which anti-Semitism is widespread was also reflected in other studies. In a survey conducted in 2015, anti-Semitism is expressed mostly by older age groups, those of low education level and in a breeding terrain of conspiracy theories. Moreover, a quite important finding from this study is that victimization and scapegoating mechanisms are important for interpreting anti-Semitism in Greece. Among these mechanisms, the first one, that means the victimizations, seems to be crucial. Collective feelings of suffering generate resentments against outgroups, the Jews, that have been recognized as victims. The study found out also that anti-Semitic attitudes are higher within those who share feelings of suffering and victimization than within those who blame other groups for their misfortunes. Also, anti-Semitism correlates closely with xenophobia, Islamophobia, homophobia, and the like. In the surveys conducted by the think tank Diagnosis, but also in Pew survey, Greeks appear to be negative towards the cultural diversity of the country in a positive correlation with their ideological position in a left versus right divide. Simultaneously, a second factor for attracting the attention of pundits, but also of the large public, on the phenomenon of anti-Semitism in Greece was abrupt skyrocketed percentage of the Golden Dome Party that first entered the Greek parliament in 2012. One of the main core elements of its ideology is the open acceptance of national socialism and all the symbolic mythology of it, such as swastika, the Hitler salute, Führerprinzip. From its very beginning, the Golden Dawn was and still remains until now a racist and anti-Semitic party, repeatedly denying and distorting the Holocaust. The party leader and the MPs of Chryssi Avi of Golden Dawn use an openly anti-Semitic rhetoric, even after they were arrested and taken into custody, accused of forming and directing a criminal organization. A trivialization of the Holocaust can be found in the rhetoric of other political parties, such as Laos, and the independent Greeks that are co-governing now in Greece. They have overextended the use of the term Holocaust, using it to identify the current economic crisis, economic Holocaust, and the so-called humanitarian crisis, social Holocaust. Apart from the above-mentioned parties, in recent times near Golden Dawn or in fierce antagonism with it, other minor formations have been created with anti-Semitism being the central tenet of their action. But as a well-embedded phenomenon, anti-Semitism is not only expressed from the political parties. Vandalism against Jewish sites and monuments, hate speech, verbally attacking the Jews, labels printed in the press against Jews, and the trivialization, if not the denial of the Holocaust, constitute common phenomena in everyday life in Greece. The actors of these desecrations were never arrested, but they were usually associated with extreme right groups like Golden Dawn. According to a study conducted by Professor Vasiliki Georgiadou from Pantheon University in Greece, the start of the migration flows in 1990s from this time until nowadays, Jews remain one of the main targets of attacks. After 2009, and when the financial crisis started to rise in Greece, attacks against Jews started to come out more frequently, blaming the Jews for the financial crisis is a common pattern in anti-Semitic and conspirational perception, within which Jews are perceived as responsible for any kind of economic crisis, even from the representatives of the Greek Orthodox Church, that blame the Jews on the Greek crisis and the destruction of the Greek family. We see from the above that anti-Semitism acquires different contents depending on the actors and themselves that do employ it for different aims and reasons. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Professor Christina Winkler.
I want to, first of all, thank the organizers for inviting me to this conference. And my presentation addresses the question if anti-Semitism in Germany today has a specific Muslim connotation, as is recently often discussed in the German media. Recent anti-Semitic incidents perpetrated by refugees added to the discussion about already existing cases of anti-Semitic attacks committed by migrants and led to the question if the large number of refugees who have entered the country from so-called MENA countries, the Middle East and North Africa, where anti-Semitism is widespread, has led to a radicalization tendency among German Muslims who have lived in the country for several decades, and to an imported anti-Semitism. In April, the German weekly Die Zeit asked, does Germany have a new anti-Semitism problem, in its article, The Jew Hatred of the Others? The article lists several incidents that support the idea of a new anti-Semitism that is transported by the German Muslim minority. The list included an incident at a Berlin primary school where a Jewish girl was bullied for months by Muslim pupils who accused her of not living according to Islamic values, and a similar incident at an elite secondary school in Berlin became public only last month. In August, the Washington Post published an article, quote, "Bullying, death threats and violence, German schools grapple with a string of anti-Semitic incidents," about how Jewish teachers in Germany's public schools are unsure about whether it is safe and appropriate to reveal their identity amid a rise in anti-Semitic incidents in German schools. Another drastic incident was the burning of an Israel flag in December last year during a demonstration by Palestinians near the Brandenburg Gate, following Donald Trump's Jerusalem announcement. Anti-Semitism has for the past years more and more often been characterized as a problem of the Muslim population and not as a phenomenon that is actually located within all parts of German society. This can partly be observed when looking at the press coverage on the cases I have just referred to, and there are numerous other anti-Semitic incidents that occurred in Germany that continue that list. In 2012, for instance, a rabbi was beaten up by 4 young Arab men in a middle-class part of Berlin in front of his 6-year-old daughter. And if you allow me these personal words, I'm a Holocaust historian, and this particular incident was the one that shocked me most. Then another incident that was also in the media was an attack by a 19-year-old Syrian refugee at a 21-year-old man who was wearing a kippah in the very hip Prenzlauer Berg region of Berlin. The victim later said he was actually not Jewish, he was just wearing a kippah to test what it's like to walk the streets of Berlin with a kippah. To give you an idea of the size of this social group we're talking about, here are just some figures that were published in a UN study last year and by the German Federal Statistics Office in April of this year. In 2017, 15% of the population, I'm talking about the overall population, which is 82 million, or 10.6 million people were migrants, including, to a very large extent, people from other EU countries who have migrated to Germany for the country's economic upswing. Nearly 1.5 million refugees have applied for asylum in Germany between 2014 and 2017. Muslims who have lived in the country for decades, the majority of whom came from Turkey, make up 1.7 million of the overall population. Refugees from Syria, Afghanistan and Iraq only form 11.2% of the overall migrant population. For a long time, German anti-Semitism was mainly seen in the context of the country's Nazi past and as a phenomenon of the far right. This began to change with the beginning of the Second Intifada in the early 2000s. The end of the Oslo peace process and newly intensifying Middle East conflict was accompanied by growing criticism of Israel's policy both in Germany as well as other European countries. Events such as the entry of the Israel Defense Forces into Jenin in 2002, the targeted killing of Sheikh Jassin in 2004, Operation Cast Lead in 2009 and Operation Protective Edge in 2014 have subsequently led to a rise in anti-Semitic incidents. A study published this year by the German foundation Remembrance, Responsibility, Future and the British Pearce Institute for the Study of Anti-Semitism concludes that anti-Semitism is, however, on the decline in the 4 countries the study examined, including Belgium, France, Germany and the UK. This trend is also confirmed in other studies that focus exclusively on Germany. German surveys often distinguish between traditional, secondary and Israel-related anti-Semitism, and this indeed makes sense in the historical context, since secondary anti-Semitism refers to a form of anti-Semitism that tries to diminish feelings of guilt or shame resulting from the Holocaust. Data from a 2016 representative survey by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation placed this particular form of anti-Semitism at 26%, whereas 10 years ago it was still 32%. According to the aforementioned study by the Pearce Institute and the Foundation Remembrance, Responsibility, Future, traditional anti-Semitic stereotypes are either stable or decreasing in Germany and measure about 6%. Israel-related anti-Semitism measured 40%, according to the 2016 survey by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. These findings demonstrate that anti-Semitism is hardly a mainly Muslim phenomenon in Germany, which is underlined by the fact that 95% of the 1,453 anti-Semitic crimes that were committed in Germany last year, according to German police, had a right-wing background. However, the public discussion about anti-Semitism among the Muslim population that is going on in Germany currently, and the examples I have mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, show that there is a need for a deeper analysis of this phenomenon, which is also the conclusion of the expert commission report that was established, or the commission was established by the German Parliament in 2009 as a response to anti-Semitic incidents in the country. Its main task, the Commission's task, is to monitor and analyze anti-Semitism in Germany and to develop practical means of combating it. The Council consists of Jewish and non-Jewish scholars, educators, and representatives of civil society institutions. This January, the Bundestag furthermore appointed Felix Klein, who's an expert on international law, to the newly established position of Federal Commissioner for Jewish Life in Germany and the fight against anti-Semitism. The Commission's latest report, which was published in June 2017, addresses anti-Semitism among the Muslim population and concludes that, based on a number of studies that were conducted in 2007, 2009 and 2010, that anti-Israel views are widespread among Muslims in Germany and tend to be generalized and transformed into an anti-Jewish attitude. The Middle East conflict is the main factor, whereas religious aspects have less of an impact. An important aspect is also the geographic region a person comes from. It is mainly migrants from Arab and North African countries who tend to hold anti-Semitic views. One possible cause for anti-Semitism among Muslims is identified in perceiving discrimination, the report concludes. Personal experiences of social exclusion, in other words, support a growing anti-Jewish attitude among Muslims. The need for new representative studies with a specific focus on anti-Semitism among Muslims, and especially Muslim refugees in Germany, is stressed both by the Expert Commission as well as the American Jewish Committee's Berlin office that conducted a non-representative interview study in 2016 among Muslim refugees. And the leading researcher is sitting in this room who was part of this study, Mr. Alvin Rosenfeld from Indiana University. The study confirmed the central role the Middle East conflict has in terms of how Israel and Jews are perceived. Given the fact that the openly anti-Islam party Alternative for Germany has recently won the last parliament where it had not yet been represented, which was Hessen 2 days ago, Germany will, however, also have to find new ways of integrating refugees as well as Muslims already living in the country for a longer period of time if anti-Semitism is to be combated successfully. Thank you.
Большое спасибо, профессор Винклер, за очень интересный и содержательный доклад. Я хочу пригласить профессора Ларса Денцика, профессора социальной психологии Государственного университета Роскильде, Дания. Его тема «Новые зарождающиеся формы антисемитизма и ксенофобии в северных государствах всеобщего благосостояния». Пожалуйста, профессор.
I will need my slides. Are they prepared?
Кто-то может сделать презентацию? Okay.
No, I'm not from Bulgaria.
Нет, это не Болгария, это профессор из Дании, профессор Денцик. Другая презентация, у нас всего их две.
Yes, thank you. My presentation today will raise one point and make four paradoxes, or point at four paradoxes. The point I want to raise is that when we speak of anti-Semitism, we very often speak of it as if it were one thing, that there is one anti-Semitism and it can manifest itself in different ways. Well, what I have found in the studies I'm going to present now, that we have to speak about at least three distinct anti-Semitisms in plural that are not strongly correlated. They are different. There are different kinds of anti-Semitism, and I will speak about different patterns of anti-Semitisms and three distinct forms of anti-Semitism. So, how do I? Can I? Is it? How do I regulate that one?
You have a clicker.
I have a green button. Okay. So thank you. So this study that I'm going to present is based on the FRA study that has been reported already here today by my colleagues who are here in the room, Professor Pergola and Professor Boyd, and we are all based at the Jewish Policy Research Institute in London, and we carried out a survey in 8 different countries in 2012, and my main data are based on that. But we are now carrying out a new wave of this time dealing with 13 different EU member states, and we are measuring or registering the perceptions and experiences of anti-Semitism among Jews in these 13 countries. And the purpose is to compare how anti-Semitism in these different countries influence the conditions for the Jews and the living conditions for the Jews there. So, and I already once published one of these reports where we made a comparison. This is a report published by the in London Institute, Jewish Policy Research Institute, and it can be downloaded from there. So some of the data that I report, you can read more about there. So let me present now the countries I'm interested in here. These are the Jewish population in the European countries based on Professor de la Pergola's estimation. And you can see in Sweden, which is one of the countries I will concentrate on, that the number of Jews is between 15 and 25,000. And this is a small number, of Jewish community members. And actually, still, there never were so many Jews in Sweden as it is now. Before the war, before Shoah, there were about 7,000 Jews living. Now we are 3 times as many, and this is unique for Europe because now all other countries, their Jewish population has diminished, but in Sweden it has increased. But still, it constitutes a very little, small fraction of the population, 1.5 Jew among 1,000 Swedish citizens. And Denmark, in blue here, you can see even less Jews. There are about between 6,000 to 8,000 Jews in Denmark, and constituting, well, a very small fraction of the population. So this is what we have in Denmark. In Denmark, the population has remained stable. You may all know about the rescue of the Danish Jews to Sweden, and most of them, almost all of them, came back to Denmark and continued the life as Danish Jews. Now here you can see the study that I'm comparing are 2 different studies. One is a study by us, the Frost study, and the other is a study by Anti-Defamation League in the United States, and use very different measures. But this study, the ADL study in 2015, measure attitudes towards, you may say, anti-Semitic attitudes, more or less of the kind of the Protocol of Zion type of anti-Semitism. And there it turns out that the level, the proportion, the proportion of anti-Semites, this is what it measures, the number of people who classify as anti-Semites according to the ADLs, that is very low in Sweden, actually lowest in the world, except for Laos and the Philippines. So there is no kind, and Denmark is also very low, but a bit higher, and it's a little more among the elderly person, but still it is on the lowest part of the whole world. I mean, there's no country that has so. I call this classic anti-Semitism. So this is one kind of anti-Semitism where you carry negative stereotypes against Jews, ideas that Jews control the world, that you have these kind of conspiracy theories, and they are very weakly represented in the Swedish population. And that creates one of the first paradoxes, because these countries, Denmark and Sweden, are among the oldest nation states in the world, actually. If you measure homogeneity in a country, you can measure it, say, by 3 different criteria. Traditionally, you can say you have a very long national history. Sweden and Denmark have both been very long nation states, longer than most of states in the world. You have also a population where most of the population up to recently all spoke the same language, Swedish in Sweden and Danish in Denmark, and it was also only spoken there, except for that part of Sweden that became Finland later, where they also spoke Finnish. So that's exclusive in that sense. And you had up to recently in both countries a state church, a Lutheran church, for every Swedish citizen was, if they were not Jewish, they were organized in this way. So this is so they were very homogeneous, and you would expect that if there is such a homogeneous society, deviances, to be a different person, have different traditions, would be very remarkable. And therefore it is quite interesting that classic anti-Semitism is so low in these countries. You could expect that being different would be more provocative than it seems to be here. Now, if you then study how strange Jews are perceived to be in these different 8 countries that you study, you can look there on Sweden in the right corner. We have 3 independent measures. One measure said if the interests of the Jews in our country are very different from the interests of the rest of the population. This is estimated by the respondents in the Frost study. It's very low. You have another measure by the ADL study that Jews are not capable of integrating into the country. It's also very low. So by all these three different indicators, independent indicators, to be strange, to be different, is perceived much less so in Sweden than, for instance, in Hungary or in Latvia or on the other countries. And that is, in a way, an interesting paradox that you can see in Hungary. Jews are perceived to be different from the rest of the population much more. Now, if you then look at the relationship between how much you perceive anti-Semitism to be a problem in the country by the Jewish respondents, and the level of the proportion of anti-Semites measured by the ADL study, you should focus on the great discrepancy in Sweden between the number of anti-Semites and the perception of anti-Semitism as a problem. Actually, it is different by factor 15 in Sweden, much more by factor 6 in the UK, and much less in the other countries by factor 2. So that causes a question to us: how can we explain that anti-Semitism is perceived to be a big problem, whereas anti-Semites, remember, is so small? And I will and that also manifests itself in other measures. In Sweden, we have measured in order that how often do you avoid visiting Jewish events because you do not feel safe as a Jew there. And you can see in Sweden, where we have so far not read this anymore, you have much more of fear, much more of willingness to manifest your Jewishness in the open than you have in the other countries. How can that be? And if you go to another measure, do you ever avoid wearing or carrying anything that could identify you as a Jew, a kippah or a Magen David or anything like that? You can see again, there is more of that in Sweden than in the other countries. So that is puzzling to us. Why is it that we have a low degree of classic anti-Semitism and a high degree of fear, of anxiety in the Jewish population in these countries? And even more paradoxical is that when we ask these respondents, do you feel that you belong to the country? Do you feel that this country is where you should live, where you belong? Then Sweden scores the highest again. These Jews who manifest fear also feel that they belong to the country more than anyone else, any Jews in any other country. But we should also notice the red column there, because that is, are you born in the country or you're not born in the country? And you can see, if you look at Sweden, about 1/3 are not born of the Jewish population, are born outside Sweden. They came after the Shoah and came from Poland, and still more than them feel they belong to the country. If you look compared to Hungary, almost every Jew in Hungary is born in Hungary, but still only 2/3 of them, little more than 2/3, feel that they belong to the country. So there are quite interesting paradoxes here. Why do we have that level that there are a few anti-Semites, according to this measure, that you have a high degree of fear, but still you feel you belong to the country. And the paradox is even stronger when you come to the next graph, where we have this debate on circumcision of baby boys and shrita, on the kosher slaughtering rituals, which are, well, the question is, have you ever personally been witness to comments or criticism of these traditional Jewish customs? And you can see in Sweden, and it's very high, almost 90 or more than 90% of the respondents have confronted that. And in Denmark, as you may have read in the papers, there was recently a strong debate, public debate. It took all the headlines in the papers on prohibiting circumcision. It was a popular debate. There was a movement even created in Denmark to stop it, and there was a popular kind of not a vote, but an internet investigation. 81% of the population want to prohibit that, but still. It was, I can say, since I was in the synagogue in Copenhagen just a week ago, then the Prime Minister there at the ceremony at the rescue of the Jews said that we will not permit it to be introduced as a law. Still, even if the movement, because that would be to make Denmark the first country in the world where you prohibit Brit Milah, and that would not be acceptable by the government. But the popular movement is there. So this is again a paradox. How come that Jewish people feel they belong to the country, they feel well in the country, and these core elements of Jewish life are so debated? We call that, and I call that, this kind of anti-Semitism, which is the second kind of anti-Semitism, it's not classic anti-Semitism, Aufklärungs-Antisemitismus. Anti-Semitism inspired by the idea of enlightenment. Children's rights, animals' rights, and animal protection ranked very high in these very modern, ultra-modern, secular Protestant countries than anywhere else. So that is one kind of, or if you call it anti-Semitism. And interesting enough, the heated debate on these issues are actually kind of a spillover effect from a strong anti-Muslim sentiments in Denmark in particular, where you have official discourse, official policy, even from the government, from the top, of really harassing the Muslim inhabitants in Denmark. And in the wake of that, it kind of spills over on the Jewish population and a critique of the Jews. So very often that is the case, that there's a strong critique of Muslims and Muslim tradition spill over and has negative effect on the Jews. Then we asked the Jewish respondents who carried out these attacks, these accusations on you that you recall. And you can see here that if you compare the countries, let's say in Hungary, it was mainly right-wing perpetrators. In Italy, you have kind of it cuts even, right-wing and left-wing. In Sweden, you have a strong presence of Muslim extremists, as are identified as it. And this may be the explanation of what I have pointed at here, because when I speak of these different kind of perpetrators, we also have to distinguish, and these are these three different kinds of anti-Semitism. The classic anti-Semitism, which are the kind of protocol of science, kind of conspiracy theory ideas, they are very often carried by right-wingers, and each of these anti-Semitism are carried by different philosophies, different basic ideas. They have different kinds of manifestations, and they have different kinds of perpetrators. So the classic anti-Semitism here, they are carried by right-wingers mostly, and these right-wingers have recently become moving again. We have in Sweden now, you have had Nazi groups that march in the street and are threatening in that sense. But they are not very many. We have this kind of an Aufklärungs-Antisemitism, which is carried by enlightened people, by liberals, very often representatives of liberal parties, and people in the culture who
1 minute, please.
Yes, and then finally, what I call the Israel-derived antisemitism, which explains most of this. Israel-derived antisemitism is when you attack individual Jews or Jewish institutions in Denmark or Sweden or in Europe because of what you perceive Israel is doing in Gaza or anywhere else. So this is a clear kind of, it is nothing to do with Israel criticism or with the so-called new anti-Semitism. It is a certain kind of attacks on individual Jews and on Jewish institutions in the diaspora because of what the perpetrator perceive Israel is doing in Israel or around Israel. And that is the explanation for the fear that we have observed. That is the explanation also for the feeling of belonging to the country, because in Sweden then, those who carry out these attacks, and we have had terrorist attacks in 2015, 16 and 17, also in Copenhagen, they were all Muslim perpetrators, so they are not us. We feel belong to this country. They come here and they kind of threaten our existence in this country where we feel that we belong. And I think then a final word, if I may, on how to fight it, because the title of this session is to how to combat anti-Semitism. And I think very many in this conference speak about education, education, education. But there is a limit to education. There was once a book written by a German educator called Sisyphos oder die Grenzen der Erziehung. I mean, you cannot do anything with education. And you can say classic anti-Semitism, to some extent, can be eradicated by education. And we have lots of programs, and that's why it explains the low degree of anti-Semitism. Aufklärungsantisemitismus cannot be eradicated only by more enlightenment, by more telling them that it is not that dangerous or that horrible that you think it is, and by appealing to tolerance of the other, that let us have different styles. Whereas this Israel-derived anti-Semitism is carried by political fanatism. It's carried so education doesn't help there. There you need security, policing, and control, and otherwise you cannot be safe in these countries. Thank you.
So we're going to have back-to-back Alexander Oscar will speak first, but we're going to have back-to-back presentations on Bulgaria.
Okay, go ahead. My name is Nikolai Galabov, and I'm the president of Organization Friends of Israel in Bulgaria, Negev. I'm excused Mr. Professor Dr. Oscar. He has to leave a bit earlier to attend to another very important event of the Jewish community. So I'm going with Mr. Behar, who is deputy of Negev, of our organization of Friends of Bulgaria, deputy president, Alex Behar. So both of us, we grew up in the Jewish community in Bulgaria, then emigrated to Israel. We was living there, serving the army back in Bulgaria, and now we are living in Sofia, and we are participating in the life of the Jewish community in Bulgaria. The slide that he's going to present it will be to report of the last year how the anti-Semitism is going in Bulgaria and what the Jewish community is doing to prevent, and all this, of course, is with the assistance of the Bulgarian government, that we have a very good relations. So please, the slide.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. In Bulgaria, we have traditionally had a very freedom-oriented society, and when it comes to anti-Semitism, we've always, we've recently been affected by the same wave that we observe in Central and Eastern Europe. So I believe that this will be of interest to you. An interesting situation we have as of late is the rise of these sporting organizations. You see here a uniform of the National Union Sporting Organization. That is actually a screen grab from their website. And they actually disseminate this content of hate and their closeness or their similarity to the ideas of Nazism during the Second World War. They actually have something called the Lukov March, who is commemorating a leader of the Bulgarian Nazi and neo-Nazi movement called Hristo Lukov, and they hold a march annually. We have taken an approach in our country to actually document and photograph all such events, because we believe that the first step in combating anti-Semitism is to actually document it well and understand, so we can measure it and hence see the improvements that we have over time or the digression thereof. Another interesting thing that has happened as of late is the memes that start to occur. The text here on this Facebook post reads, there is a nice and convenient word, soap and Jews hate all peoples. And we see a lot of that being sponsored by the populist far right. And that actually helps raise a part of the population that is very vulnerable to such messages. Another such example is the response to Neta winning the Eurovision 2018 contest. The post over there on Facebook says, Hitler was right and still is. And that is a response to her success, and that that Eurovision specifically is a political show that proves the Jews' governance. Our organization, in partnership, Negev, in partnership with OJB Shalom, we monitor Facebook extensively in the sort of the Bulgarian echo chamber of anti-Semitism, and we have been extensively using the new hate speech tools within Facebook and Twitter in order to try to depress the dissemination of such information, because the longer it stays online, the more eyeballs and to see it and are affected by this content. The other national phenomena we see is these neo-Nazism being mixed with nationalism. And that seems to be a common European, Central and Eastern European platform. It just appears that our region is particularly vulnerable to such messages due to the history and the kind of people and the kind of national pride people have in our region. This is a screenshot of something we called Look of March of 2018. This was earlier this year. We've actually been working very hard with some technological means to assess the size of this rally. We took aerial footage of it, and we used clustering analysis to figure out how many people attended. And we're actually starting to develop some trends now to see whether there's growth or it's subsiding. Unfortunately, with the rise of this, what we would call cheap nationalism, we see this growing now. I think this year it was around 1,300 to 1,500 people as a whole. And they've found a particularly interesting way to promote this through the schools. So some of the comments that were made about education here are really, they really strike home for us as well. Because these kinds of movements, they're able to attract from younger age, people from a younger age. Now, this is a particular gentleman who he actually served on a government position. He was a...
Let me add something. That guy is director of the Ministry of Defense, Department of Ministry of Defense. Once we saw this picture, the Organization of Jews in Bulgaria, we sent a lot of letters, and that guy still is taking his position.
So yep, as opposed to many Western nations where this would be a career-ending event, we are still not there, and we have a lot of progress to do towards a situation where this actually has real implications, real-life implications.
But as you say, the tank is German. It's not a...
Right. It's quite rusty, as a matter of fact. Is it? Ah, right. Oh, this is a museum of old rusty equipment, which, adds further insult to all this. Another situation we've seen, and this really affects the Bulgarian tourism sector as well, especially tourists coming from Israel, is the Nazi memorabilia being sold in old stores, promoting hatred and association with with Hitler and Nazi Germany, essentially. And they actually sell these at the Bulgarian Black Sea, which is a prime tourist destination during the summer months. Several more examples. In 2016, a member of parliament called Metodi Andreev had a television interview in which he said that the Rothschild financed the communist revolution, and thus the red star symbolized the son of Rothschild. I mean, of course, once you're given a platform for a person like that over television and national media, the message spreads without anyone fact-checking it. So we actually have a problem with pushing back against such messages, because once it's out there, it's a conspiracy theory and the fire is already lit. So we're fighting in a very constructive way over media, both social and televised, in order to depress these factless and baseless messages. Another case in 2017, February 2017, a candidate for a member of parliament, Professor Ivo Christov, in an election rally in Plovdiv, our second largest city, said that the Jewish program, backed with Jewish money, led to the liquidation of the Russian Empire. And those kind of incendiary messages are what we have to face with. Even though, and that's something that I have to really emphasize here, is the fact that it doesn't result in any violence per se, or either towards Israeli tourists or towards the wider Bulgarian Jewish community. We're quite lucky that it doesn't result in violence, but we do still have a lot of those. And you can see on this very photo a central city in Sofia where neo-Nazism and nationalism are bold into this one message and one movement. Another case is football hooligans. I'm actually going to let Nikki talk about this a little bit.
The football hooligans, as you know, everywhere in Europe, they are the leading, and like a TV, they are promoting the Nazi symbols. This is one of the famous teams in Bulgaria, the football teams, and it was between the games, the guys was inside on the stadium, downstairs, not where is the fence. So what we past the security, and the TV show it maybe more than 2 minutes. And what happened? The Bulgarian government, according to the laws, they gave penalty to this club like 5,000 leva. It's like 2,500 euro. First step. The second, the Jewish community of Bulgaria, we send a lot of letters. As you know, our policy is not to stay neutral and to be passive. We just sending, we are pushing, and we are attacking such acts. So what we are going to do with the same football team, we already discussed and we prepared this, something similar like Chelsea made with the World Jewish Congress.
1 minute, please.
Against the hate speech. Against hate speech. So the next few football games that are going to be in Sofia, we are going to open the transparent that is written against the hate speech. And I think that it's a good move from our side against these funds.
Some more cases. This is a photo from 2018, very recent. It's seen in Sofia, another neo-Nazism. And if you kind of ignore the authenticity of this flag, it's probably ordered over the internet, because I mean, some research will show you that this doesn't reflect reality. But they don't care about this. It's just a message to be spread. And another very important point is a ceremony honoring Markov, the defense minister in Institute of Social Policy, headed by this Ivo Antonov, which we mentioned earlier, who is one of the organizers.
This is, I'm sorry, we are just adding some information together because I'm more familiar with that case also. We send a lot of letters. This is ex-legionnaire during the Second World War. He is 96 years old. Once was discussion about the Jewish that was transferred to the Nazi camps from the Trachea Belomoria area that was belonged under the jurisdiction of Bulgarian country. He said that those people are enemies to Bulgaria, to the Bulgarian country. And we sent a lot of letters. We was very angry about this situation. What we did, in fact, he get his medal, but the Ministry of Defense, he wasn't there on that time.
And we've also had several drives to actually clean up graffiti, like you see here. It says Hitler was right. We actually gather public support to go out around the city, document the occurrences, and remove them using special tools, and actually deface the graffiti, which further insults the people who write it. And a little bit about the organization, and I'll let you read through this, and thank you again for being here. And now I'm going to pass the microphone to Nikolai. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Would like to assume something. We are already prepared on 16th of February, a march of tolerance. It's coordinated with the mayor of Sofia, Jordanka Fandukova, that you saw also on the slides. There is also a deputy minister of the foreign affairs who is assisting us. The Bulgarian government prepared such position to take care about anti-Semitism and the violence and the hate of speech. So 16th of February, the march will be in Sofia, a march of tolerance, and it will be led from Ambassador Ronald Lauder. Already he confirmed his visiting in Sofia, so please take in account that if somebody wants to participate, it will be a good move. Also, we can give alert to everybody that we are not patient, we are not neutral, we are not waiting, and we are going to prepare ourselves. Just wanted 1 minute. The professor Ilieva, she came from the Bulgarian scientist, and she wanted to read, but she left for the flight. There is only one sentence, please allow me, that Bulgaria did it. But it's important for Bulgaria that she do it. The government.
The problem is that we don't have the time for discussion.
Bulgarian government is doing a lot for the Jewish, so I think that we have to be also together with them, and we have to respect them. It's Bulgaria. I will give you.
This report we published in the website of the Russian Jewish Congress. We'll publish it, absolutely. And we'll publish in the collection.
Few sentences, please. It's on Russian. Българска законодателство не съдържа легални дефиниции понятия антисемитизъм, но несмотря на это, акты расизма и антисемитизма связываются прежде всего с нарушением основных политических прав българских граждан. Важно отметить, что България приняла рабочее определение между правительством Организации Международного альянса памяти Холокоста. Это было очень важно. И България 18 октября 2017 последний доклад агентства по основным правам IHRA. This is very important for me to pass you that Bulgarian government make this step. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, Gila Bauman, member of the Jewish Diplomatic Corps of the World Jewish Congress. Please, you have 10 minutes because we don't have the time for discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. Next week, we will commemorate the 80th anniversary of the pogrom night. It was the night of November 9, 1938, when synagogues all over Germany were burning. Jewish shops, apartments, cemeteries were demolished. Jews were arrested. Jews lost their lives. November 9, 1938 marked a night a bad dream turned into a nightmare. Before this day, German Jews were step by step being discriminated against and excluded from public life. The pogrom night was a foresight of what would become the most horrible crime in history, the so-called final solution, the Shoah. Next Friday, November 9, people all over Germany will commemorate this meaningful day and the victims of the Shoah. Members of government, of parliament, of the judiciary, of the Jewish communities, of civil society will remember the events of that night and the many gruesome nights that should follow. And we will ask ourselves, how could people, neighbors, colleagues, friends become partners to such a ferocious regime, such a malicious dictator? How could they murder, stand by, and pretend they did not notice? How did they not care? But most of all, we will ask ourselves, can it happen again? I'm sure you've heard about current events in Germany, about anti-Semitic incidents that concerned us in the last years, about attacks against refugees, hatred against people of color, against Sinti and Roma, Muslims, politicians, journalists. But it feels like the wind has changed in the last years. I was asked to choose a title for this presentation, so I chose a question. 80 years after Pogrom Night, is anti-Semitism on the rise in Germany again? Although I focus on anti-Semitism, there are so many more questions to ask. As a member of the Jewish community in Germany and the World Jewish Congress Jewish Diplomatic Corps, I do not only see worrying signs for the Jewish community, but for society as a whole. There is a general shift in social climate. It is getting colder in Germany, and I'm not saying this because winter is coming. When a few Jews that survived the Shoah were returning to Germany after the war, it was meant to be only for a short period of time. They thought they would be leaving soon, to the US, to Israel, to other countries. Even in the following decades, they did not call Germany their home. My grandmother, for instance, who is 95 years old and hid herself in a cellar during the Shoah in Bucharest, has been living in Germany for more than 50 years and still does not have German citizenship, only an Israeli passport. Jews in Germany after the war were sitting on packed suitcases. They were ready to leave. But with the years passing by, the suitcases were unpacked and stowed, and Jews were feeling home in Germany again. Yet today we feel that something has changed and doubt is cutting its way into our hearts, and we're asking, is this still our home? I must emphasize that there is no wave of emigration or anything like that, but German Jews have started to look where their suitcases are stored. This feeling of doubt, of not belonging, it was never really gone. It was always there, but it became more and more nagging in the past years and months. We felt it in 2012, when the district court in Cologne ruled that the circumcision of a Muslim boy amounted to criminal assault, thereby igniting a debate about male circumcision that brought a wave of anti-Semitism to light. We felt it in 2014 during the Israeli-Gaza conflict. Protesters were walking the streets in Germany shouting, "Jews to the gas," or "Jew, Jew, cowardly pig, come out and fight alone." And the police didn't react. And we feel it again today. Anti-Semitism seems to flourish on the internet, in the streets, even in the media. Jewish children are being bullied in schools. Jews have been attacked in the streets. They're being insulted on social media or faced with anti-Semitic remarks in their daily life. 2 German Muslim rappers were awarded the Echo Music Prize, the most important German music award, for a music album including a songline that said, and I quote, "My body more defined than that of Auschwitz detainees." We have a right-wing populist party in Germany, the so-called Alternative for Germany, that is sitting now in the German parliament and in all of the 16 state parliaments. Representatives of this party are not only stirring up hatred against Muslims and immigrants, but they want to ban religious slaughter, prohibit male circumcision, and cut down funding for initiatives against right-wing extremism. And beyond that, the party does not dissociate itself from representatives with anti-Semitic attitudes and those who distort the Holocaust. Party leader Alexander Gauland, for instance, called the Nazi era, and I quote, "only a bird shit in over 1,000 years successful German history." His party comrade Björn Höcke called for a 180-degree turn in the politics of remembers, and so on and so forth. This is deeply disturbing for the Jewish community. And as Professor Winkler already pointed out, in April 2017, we had an expert commission on anti-Semitism that was instituted by the German parliament, which published a report on anti-Semitism. This report determined that 10% of the German population have classic anti-Semitic attitudes, such as that Jews have too much influence. 26% agree to secondary anti-Semitism, for instance, that Jews try to profit from the Shoah. And last but not least, 30% of the German population have anti-Semitic attitudes when it comes to Israel. In December 2017, there were demonstrations in the heart of Berlin against the relocation of the US Embassy to Jerusalem. Protesters were burning Israeli flags and shouting "Death to Israel" in German and Arabic. And this is only one example. In 2017, there were 1,453 criminal assaults of anti-Semitic character in Germany. However, many anti-Semitic assaults do not exceed the threshold of punishability and are thus not reflected in the statistics. Moreover, anti-Semitic assaults that cannot be assigned to one political side are automatically categorized as being right-wing extremist offenses. So, according to the statistics, over 90% are right-wing extremist anti-Semitic assaults. The problem is not only this right-wing extremism, but also the anti-Semitism by Muslims and the radical left. So, the question is, what can we do against it? As Professor Winkler already pointed out, a lot has been done. For instance, the position of the Federal Commissioner for Jewish Life and the fight against anti-Semitism has been instituted, and Germany has adopted the IRA definition in 2017 and passed a resolution calling to combat anti-Semitism resolutely. In addition, we have also a law in place that is fighting hate speech on the internet. So, what we need to do is we need to bring society back together to bridge gaps and to fight this anti-Semitism together. So yes, thank you.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes, not a lot. Okay, well, I was going to. So, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the first question here, but we want to get at least one or two questions from the audience. So, Valerie, I'll cede my question to you.
Окей. Мой вопрос очень простой. Во-первых, у нас все-таки тема это противодействие. И вот у меня вопрос к Пранвере Тика. Какой опыт противодействия расизму и антисемитизму есть в Греции, и как Греция противостоит этому явлению? А также у меня вопрос госпоже Гилли Бауман про АДГ. Это понятно, что альтернатива для Германии, что это за партия, это тоже ясно. Но в партии «Альтернатива для Германии» возникла еврейская фракция. И эта еврейская фракция, она, в общем, не случайно возникла. Они, евреи, пусть это русские евреи, это не имеет значения, они понимают, что она, эта партия, может дать им какую-то защиту от мусульман или, так сказать, от какого-то антисемитизма и так далее. Вот как вы на это смотрите и как вы, так сказать, считаете вот это вот как бы определенное противоречие между тем, что вы сказали, и тем, что вот как ощущают евреи Германии?
Sorry, I didn't get the beginning. You were asking what view of the...
I want to tell you that in Alternative for Germany, there is a Jewish fraction. It's a Jewish group,
oh, yeah.
and created there. And it's not suddenly because the Jews looking in this party some remedy for Muslim anti-Semitism. But what is the reason and how do you think will be the perspective of this position of the Jewish population in Germany?
Well, actually, you have to see that this fraction within the Alternative for Germany, there are about 20 members. And if you look at the Jewish population in Germany, we have about, let's say, 200,000 Jews in Germany. So it's only a small portion of the Jewish community. And the official standing of the Jewish community in Germany is that this party is no alternative for Jews because they try to make Jewish life in Germany impossible. I mean, they had a program for the elections in Bavaria right now, which said that they wanted to ban religious slaughter and to ban the Shrita, not the Shrita, the Brit Milah, the male circumcision. And if you will ban those two things, then Jewish life in Germany will be impossible. And moreover, as I said, there are a lot of members and also representatives of the party that that distort the remembrance of the Shoah, that just want to change the view of or the perspective on the Shoah, and that is unacceptable to the Jewish community. So this is why the Jewish community also published a statement against this party and also the group within the party. And well, I think that it's not really an option for Jews, and I hope that those Jews that are part of the Alternative for Germany will somehow see that they may think that the Alternative for Germany is going to fight Muslim immigration and therefore Muslim anti-Semitism, but it may start with the Muslims, but it doesn't end with the Muslims, and that's what we know.
Maybe I could add something. As far as I remember, it was Mr. Höcke who also called for what we call in Germany the Schlussstrichdebatte, so that it's time to stop talking about German guilt and also bring an end to Holocaust education as we know it today. So this is, I think, it goes without saying that this is not an alternative for German Jews.
We're going to go to the audience in 1 second, but Valerie started with a very specific point, and I don't want you to answer this right now. We'll take a couple of questions at once, but we heard in some ways very different presentations about the causes, the problems. My organization is an advocacy organization. We take all of this data that you present and we try to translate it into action. So what we heard from Bulgaria is very different than what we heard from Professor Denchek about the three different types of anti-Semitism. In this case, the dramatic increase in anti-Semitic attacks by Muslims. So, we talk about a unified European continent, but there's so many different strains that we're dealing with. So I want you to think about, how do we take this? How do we take all of what we just heard, and how do we, besides education, or how do we apply the different levers of law enforcement? How do we apply education where it could be an appropriate tool? So think about that, and we'll take 2 questions in the front, and then we'll try to get to the back. So Professor Schlenoff start, and then we'll take the gentleman in the first row.
Sure,
please, questions, not comments, because we're trying to get
questions.
As many people.
Okay.
Questions.
To the Bulgarian friends, I couldn't understand whether there is any governmentally sponsored glorification of Lukov or not, or only non-governmental, as we saw in the March for Lukov, which seems that's number 1. Second, whether you have a BDS in Bulgaria, I think not, but if you say that's really not so, it would be quite significant. That's number 2. And number 3,
Mika, we only have a few minutes.
Huh?
We only have a few minutes.
Well, number 3, only. Whether Alternative for Deutschland is for the BDS or against.
All right, before we answer, we're going to take, I hope you jotted those down, and we'll take one more question here, and then we'll get the panelists to answer.
Thank you. I'm Daniel Berg from the Jewish Diplomatic Corps for the World Jewish Congress. It's a question for Professor Lars Denik. You said there's 3 distinct forms of anti-Semitism. I'm interested to know, I don't see them as distinct. It doesn't take long for them to start crossing over. So if somebody is against Israeli policy, or they claim to be against anti-Israel, it doesn't take long until they start saying, well, actually it's because of US Jewish involvement.
What's the question?
This is the question, thank you. It's because of the US Jewish lobby supporting Israel, or that if people are against Jeremy Corbyn, it's because of his stance on Israel and therefore Jewish people are seeking to undermine him. So to me, those three areas cross over. I invite you to comment. Thank you.
Okay, let's, we'll start with the last, we'll start with and then answer Mika's questions, and then we'll head to the back.
You can always say they may come to crossover, but what is important, I think, to note that they are distinct in these three respects. Those who carry out these are very different. Take the one on the critique of Brit Milá and Shita. They are mainly liberal, they write articles, they are not violent, they propose things, they are usually quite I mean, sophisticated, educated persons that have no idea of attacking Jews as Jews. They want to attack these traditions, and they are not anti-Israeli or anything like that. So that's one group, and they are distinct. Then, if you have these, what I call the Israel-derived, which is mostly carried by not only by the Muslim extremists and certain extreme leftists, to them it is a war. To them it is a war because they defend anything Palestinian, and therefore they feel that they have the right to accuse you or me or anyone else who is Jewish, because Jews are regarded by them to be kind of advocates of Israel or belong to Israel or somehow. And that is not shared by the right-wing party, because the right-wing parties often support Israel. They are very pro-Israel because they are so anti-Muslim. So they think it's good, Israel will fight it for us. So these, I think it's important not to collapse it. It will confuse things. And I think that your first question, also you have to one comment on the differences within Europe. I think also you cannot regard Europe as one unit and say from America. It is very, very different. As my figures show, between the eastern part of Europe, Hungary, Latvia, and Bulgaria now, and what is happening in the most modern Protestant secular part in Scandinavia, Germany, and United Kingdom. I think, and therefore it's important also, because we return to that, the way to combat it, how we will attack the kind of anti-Semitism, has to be different. We cannot just say education, because education is too simple to say and difficult to carry out against certain groups. For certain groups are perceptive to education, but other groups are not at all perceptive. You need other means. So therefore, my message here is to be much more sophisticated in this, and to have various attacks to various countries and to various kinds of anti-Semitism.
And that's what I was trying to get out. We'll try to hear from some others as well, that one size doesn't fit all. Let's try to answer the Bulgarian questions.
According to the questions of the Look of March, last year...
You ask a question and leave? That's not nice.
We've got the sessions.
I'm joking. Go.
The Organization of Jewish of Bulgaria, and with the help, assistance of the World Jewish Congress, we make a petition. Ambassador Laudner personally gave it to the Minister of Bulgaria, Boyko Borisov. We informed them, we sent a lot of letters, we did a lot, but in fact, already 16 years the Look of March is done, is going on, and it's growing. That's why we are going to make something parallel with the March of Tolerance. We hope that a lot of people will follow us and will come with us. How it will be, the Bulgarian government, according to the law, it's allowed. They can do it, and those are the facts. No, they are not sponsoring, and also historically, the Bulgarian people, the Bulgarian nation is very tolerant with the Jewish. As you know, the history, Bulgaria saved the Jew. So we have a very good communication. We have a very good work together with the government and the Deputy Minister of Exterior. We have a good dialogue. We are trying to prevent. We are trying to talk. We are doing what we can do. Of course, always there are some people that are managing the things. As we show the presentation, the guy from the Ministry of Defense with Heil Hitler. So we are trying. The government is with us. We are positive in the future. This is my personal.
That's a very, very good question. Thank you for asking it. We, first of all, the BDS activism is generally a left political movement and is fueled by the political left. And the Bulgarian brand of political left is socialist, which does not dispute the Jewish contributions to Bulgarian society. And further to that point, both of us actually served in the Israeli military, and we promote our own, and we're business people in Bulgaria, and we promote our own version of diplomacy to that effect. So we speak to members of the business community, and we see great support for Israeli technology and Israeli progress. And so I would actually bravely say that we do not have a BDS problem in Israel, and Israeli products actually enjoy great fanfare in the local market. So thank you.
Here.
Glorification
Yes.
of Zhivkov? No, we don't. I don't think we do.
It's okay. So, an answer on combating anti-Semitism in Greece. Greece generally responded very lately and very reluctantly towards combating racism in general in Greece, and also specifically for anti-Semitic attitudes and behaviors. It adopted a law only in 2015 under the Syriza, the left-wing party government, where this law amended very important articles of a previous law that was not so effective in combating racism in Greece. But a lot of things remain to change, and a lot of things have to be done in all the fronts of the society, and not only in the field of the law.
Well, we've exceeded our time limit, but I'm going to ask if the panelists have any final words, brief final words that you'd like to share with the audience. And if not, Valeria and I, oh, well, we do. Okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen, just finally, you notice that we're quite young as Jewish diplomats, and I believe that in my study of the history of the Jewish people in Europe, we're repeating the same pattern we've had in the 20s of talking a lot about anti-Semitism, but not really pushing the people we pay taxes to do something about it. So I think we must accelerate our collective efforts to put legislation in place and to put an end, or at least try to depress this kind of behavior, for which our own children now will have to face down the line. So thanks for your support in advance.
I think that's a good way to sum it up. I think I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody in the audience. I want to thank the panelists. If we had more time, I think we could have dug deeper into the issue. But as noted, all the papers will be available. On behalf of the RJC, I want to thank all of you. And the next session starts at 5. I would ask if it's possible, we're trying to get a minion together, so if a half a dozen or so men can stay behind. 3.5 minutes. It'll take just a couple of minutes. But again, thank all of you, and the session has concluded.